The sun was slowly falling behind the hills, painting the wide land in soft gold and orange colors. The small town was quiet, with only the wind whispering through the empty streets. Dust danced in the air with every gentle breeze. It was one of those evenings when everyone hurried home before the night became too cold. Horses were tied to wooden posts outside the small shops, and a few lamps flickered to life in windows, casting warm light onto the dirt road. In that quiet moment, a sound broke the silence, a woman's trembling voice. "Please, someone help me. My daughter, she's sick." A few heads turned, but most people simply glanced and walked on. The woman's voice was weak and her steps were unsteady. She wore an old shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her boots were covered with dust and her hands were shaking. She had walked a long distance to get here, her heart filled with fear for her little girl. Her name was Mary. She was a widow, living alone with her only child in a small cabin outside the town. Life had not been kind to her. The days were long and hard. She worked in her little garden, sewed clothes for neighbors, and did everything she could to provide for her daughter. Even when her body was tired, she never allowed herself to stop because her child was her whole world. That morning, her daughter had woken with a burning forehead and weak voice. She could barely open her eyes. Mary had tried everything she knew: cold cloth on the girl's forehead, water to keep her from drying out, whispered prayers, but nothing helped. The girl's breathing had grown heavy and uneven. That was when Mary made the hardest decision of her life. She would walk all the way to town and ask for help. Her journey had been slow and painful. The road was rough, and her heart pounded with worry at every step. The sun was already setting when she finally reached the center of town. And now, standing there, surrounded by people who had their own lives and problems, she cried out again. "Please, my daughter. She needs help. Someone, please." For a moment, no one moved. Some people looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, but most simply hurried past her. She felt her knees grow weak and she held on to the wooden post beside her to keep from falling. She whispered a small prayer, her voice shaking like the wind. Then, from the other end of the street, a man on a brown horse slowed down. He was a tall man with a weathered hat and a worn leather coat. His boots were covered in the same dust as the road. He was a cowboy, one of those quiet men who spoke little but noticed everything. His name was Luke. He had spent most of his life riding from town to town, working on ranches, fixing fences, and helping people when he could. He didn't have a family of his own, but he carried a kind heart behind his silent eyes. He saw the widow struggling to stand. He heard the soft cry in her voice, not just words, but the pain of a mother afraid of losing her child. Something inside him stirred. He gently pulled the reins of his horse, bringing it to a stop. The sound of hooves against the ground faded as he approached. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Are you all right?" Mary turned her head slowly, her eyes tired and red from holding back tears. "My daughter. She's sick. I don't have a wagon. I walked all the way from the cabin near the creek. I need someone to help me." Her voice cracked at the end of her sentence, and she pressed her hands to her chest as if holding her heart together. Luke stepped closer. He could see how exhausted she was. Her shawl was worn thin, her face pale from worry and the long walk. She wasn't pretending, her fear was real. "Where's your home?" he asked gently. "Out past the creek." "It's not far, just... It feels far when you're alone," she whispered. Luke looked around. People were passing by, pretending not to hear. He felt a quiet anger inside, not at them, but at the world for being so cold sometimes. He knew how it felt to be alone. "Ma'am," he said, taking off his hat respectfully, "I can take you back." "We'll get to your girl fast." Mary blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected anyone to help, especially a stranger. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her lips trembled. You'll help me?" "Yes, ma'am," Luke replied with calm certainty. "I've got a good horse. She's fast. We'll get there." Her eyes filled with tears. Not from sorrow now, but from the sudden light of hope. Luke held out his hand, steady and strong. Mary hesitated for only a second, then placed her cold, tired hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, like someone who meant his words. He led her gently toward his horse. The animal was calm, its brown coat shining faintly in the lantern light. Luke helped her climb up carefully, making sure she felt safe. She held on tightly, her hands gripping the saddle as if holding on to her last chance. "Hold on," Luke said softly, swinging himself onto the horse behind her. He took the reins and gave the horse a gentle nudge. The animal started forward with smooth, strong steps, carrying them into the deepening night. As they rode out of town, the streets grew quieter behind them. The cold wind brushed Mary's face and her heart raced, not from fear but from a fragile hope she hadn't felt all day. The stars were beginning to appear, small and bright in the darkening sky. The horse's steady rhythm gave her a strange sense of comfort. Luke didn't say much, but he kept a close eye on the road. He guided the horse through narrow paths and open fields with practiced ease. He had ridden these trails many times. The world around them was calm and wide, but inside Mary's chest everything was storming. She thought about her daughter lying alone in that small wooden cabin. She pictured her tiny hands resting on the blanket, her face warm with fever, her breathing soft and uneven. The image pressed against her heart like a weight. Luke noticed her silence. "She's going to be all right," he said quietly. Not as a promise, but as a way to give her strength. Mary swallowed hard. "I don't have anyone else," she whispered. "It's just me and her. She's all I've got," Luke nodded. He didn't have to say much. He understood that kind of love. The kind that kept a person walking miles with tired legs. The kind that made a mother cry out in the middle of town. The kind that made strangers stop and listen. The wind grew cooler as they crossed the open fields. The night wrapped around them like a dark blanket, but the moonlight showed them the way. Mary's hands were cold, but Luke's steady presence made her feel less alone. Every minute felt like an hour to her, but slowly the familiar outline of her cabin appeared in the distance. A small wooden house with smoke still curling faintly from the chimney. A soft light flickered through the window. Her heart skipped a beat. "There it is," she whispered. Luke urged the horse a little faster. He could sense her desperation growing stronger with every step closer to home. Soon the horse slowed as they reached the cabin. Luke jumped down first and helped Mary off gently. Her legs wobbled beneath her, but she stood firm. She rushed to the door, her heart pounding. She pushed it open and ran inside. The warm air of the small room wrapped around her. Her daughter lay on the small bed, her cheeks flushed with fever, her hair damp against her forehead. Mary knelt beside her, brushing the girl's hair back gently. Luke followed quietly, standing at the doorway. He removed his hat again, a quiet sign of respect for the fragile moment he had walked into. Mary whispered softly to her daughter, her voice trembling but full of love. "Mama's here, sweetheart. I'm here." For the first time that day, she didn't feel completely helpless. Someone had heard her cry. Someone had cared enough to stop. The fear in her heart was still there, but now it was wrapped in something warmer. Hope. Luke watched in silence. He didn't need thanks. The sight of a mother finding her child was enough. In that small cabin, with the wind still whispering outside, a stranger's kindness had lit a quiet flame of courage. The night grew darker, wrapping the little cabin in a soft blanket of quiet. The sound of crickets filled the air and the wind gently brushed against the wooden walls. Inside, the small oil lamp flickered, casting a warm golden light across the room. The faint glow made the place feel safe, even though worry still lived in Mary's heart. Mary knelt beside her daughter's bed, holding the girl's tiny hand in her own. Her daughter's face looked pale and her forehead was still warm. Her breathing came in small, uneven breaths, and each sound made Mary's heart ache a little more. She softly brushed the child's hair back from her face, whispering to her as if her voice alone could make everything better. Luke stood quietly near the door. He was used to long nights under the stars, hearing the wind and the horses. But this night was different. He felt something deep inside as he watched the widow hold her child. He had seen many things on the open road, but nothing ever touched him the way a mother's love did. He could see the strength and the fear in her eyes, two feelings living side by side. Mary finally turned to him. Her eyes were tired, but her voice was gentle. "Thank you for bringing me back," she whispered. Luke tipped his hat slightly. "Ma'am, you don't need to thank me," he said softly. "No mother should have to walk alone when her child needs help." Mary gave a small nod. She wanted to say more, but her throat was tight with emotion. She looked back at her daughter and gently pulled the blanket up around her shoulders to keep her warm. "She's all I have," Mary said after a moment of silence. "Since her father passed, it's just been me and her. Some days it's hard, real hard, but I look at her smile and it gives me the strength to keep going." Luke listened quietly. He didn't interrupt because he understood that sometimes a person doesn't need answers, just someone who will listen. He walked a little closer, careful not to make too much noise. "Ma'am," he said softly. "What's her name?" "Lily," Mary replied with a faint smile. "Her name is Lily." Luke looked down at the little girl. Even in her sickness, there was something gentle and sweet in her face. She looked peaceful, as if she were dreaming of better days. "She looks strong," Luke said. "Like her mama." Mary gave a small, tired laugh. It was the first time that evening her face softened. "She's stronger than she knows," she whispered. The wind outside grew a little louder, but inside the cabin it was warm and still. Luke stepped over to the fireplace and added a few pieces of wood to keep the fire burning through the night. He moved carefully, like a man who had spent years doing simple things with quiet respect. The flames grew brighter, filling the room with a soft crackling sound. Mary leaned closer to Lily, placing a cool cloth on her forehead. She could feel the heat of the fever still holding on. Her hands were steady even though her heart was full of worry. She didn't want her daughter to see her fear. So she spoke to her softly about things Lily loved: flowers, sunshine, the sound of the river behind their house. "You'll feel better soon," Mary whispered to Lily. "We'll go pick flowers like we used to. Do you remember how you used to laugh when the wind blew your hair?" Lily's tiny fingers twitched a little, as if she could hear her mother in her dreams. That small movement gave Mary hope, even if just a little. Luke sat down on the wooden chair near the door. He wasn't used to being inside someone's home for long, but something about this night made him stay. He looked around the cabin. It was simple but full of care. A few shelves held jars of herbs and small belongings. A quilt hung over the back of the chair, hand-stitched with tiny flowers. He could tell Mary had built a life here piece by piece with hard work and love. "Is there a doctor nearby?" Luke asked after a long moment. Mary shook her head slowly. "The nearest doctor is in the next town. It's a long ride, and the road isn't easy at night." Luke leaned forward slightly. "I can ride there," he offered calmly. "I know the road. I can bring him back." Mary's eyes widened a little. She hadn't expected more help from this quiet stranger. Her heart filled with both gratitude and worry. "It's late," she said softly. "And it's a long way. I can't ask you to do that." "You didn't ask," Luke replied kindly. "But I want to help. A child shouldn't fight this alone." Mary looked down at Lily's small face. She wanted to protect her little girl more than anything in the world. She knew the journey would be dangerous for her to make alone. But Luke, he had a horse, strong and fast, and there was something about the way he spoke, steady, honest, that made her trust him. She nodded slowly. "If you think you can make it." Luke stood up, tightening the strap of his coat. "I'll make it," he said simply. Before leaving, he walked closer to the bed. He didn't touch the little girl, but he lowered his voice as if speaking to her gently through the quiet. "Hang in there, little one," he whispered. "Help is on the way." Mary's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only tears of fear. There was a spark of hope mixed in with them. Someone was standing beside her in this dark hour, and that made all the difference. Luke turned to leave, but Mary stood and reached for his arm lightly. "Please," she said softly, "be careful." He nodded once. "I will." The door opened with a soft creak and the cold night air rushed in. Luke stepped outside, pulling his hat lower over his eyes. His horse waited patiently under the stars, its breath visible in the cool air. He climbed onto the saddle with the ease of a man who had spent half his life on the back of a horse. Mary stood at the door, watching him disappear into the dark. The sound of hooves slowly faded into the distance until all she could hear was the wind again. She wrapped her shawl tightly around herself and closed the door. Inside, the cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire and Lily's breathing. Mary returned to the bedside, her hands steady as she cared for her daughter. She whispered to her softly, telling her stories from when she was little, stories that always made Lily smile. She spoke about sunny fields and spring mornings, about the way the flowers opened after a gentle rain. Time passed slowly. Every minute felt long, but Mary kept her heart strong. She didn't want Lily to feel alone, even in sleep. She held her daughter's hand and hummed a soft song she used to sing to her as a baby. Outside, Luke rode through the open fields with only the stars to guide him. The night air was cold and the wind brushed against his face, but he didn't slow down. He thought of the little girl lying in that small bed, and the way her mother's voice shook when she asked for help. He didn't know this family, but something deep inside told him this was where he was meant to be tonight. The moonlight guided him down the winding path. He knew the way to the next town. He had ridden it before, though never this late. His horse moved quickly, hooves thudding against the ground in a steady rhythm. Back at the cabin, Mary fought sleep even though her eyes burned with exhaustion. She couldn't close her eyes, not when Lily needed her. She checked the cloth on her daughter's forehead, replaced it with a fresh one, and sat close, whispering soft words of love and strength. "Everything's going to be all right," she whispered, even though she didn't know if it was true, but saying it made her heart a little stronger. She looked at the door every now and then, listening for the sound of hooves returning. The night felt long, but hope kept her awake. She believed Luke would return. And somewhere far down that moonlit road, a cowboy rode faster than he ever had before, carrying with him the quiet promise he had made to a mother and her little girl. The night grew colder as Luke rode deeper into the open land. The moonlight guided his way, shining softly on the winding path. The stars sparkled above him like tiny lanterns in the dark sky. The air smelled fresh and the wind brushed against his face, but he didn't slow down. Every beat of the horse's hooves was like the ticking of a clock in his mind. He knew every minute mattered for that little girl lying in the cabin. Luke leaned slightly forward, whispering soft words to his horse. "Come on, girl. We've got a little one waiting for us." The horse snorted gently as if it understood. They had traveled together for many miles before, through rain and sun, across rivers and fields. Tonight, the bond between man and horse felt even stronger. The road to the next town was long, but Luke knew it well. He followed the narrow path through open fields and then into the stretch of trees that lined the way. The branches above swayed gently in the wind, and the leaves rustled like quiet whispers. He could hear the sound of an owl in the distance, calling into the night. It was peaceful, but Luke's heart was steady and focused. He thought about the widow's face, the way her voice shook when she said, "She's all I have." Those words stayed with him as he rode. He didn't know the woman well. In fact, before tonight he hadn't even known her name. But something about her strength and her fear made him feel connected to her and her child. He had known what it was like to be alone. He had lived much of his life on the road, with only his horse and the stars to keep him company. He had seen many faces and heard many stories, but this one felt different. This was a night that mattered. The wind grew stronger as he rode through the fields. The tall grass moved like waves, and the world felt wide and endless. But Luke didn't feel lost. He felt a quiet sense of purpose guiding him forward. Back at the cabin, the night passed slowly for Mary. She sat at Lily's bedside, listening to every soft breath her daughter took. The little girl's face was still warm, but her breathing had become more gentle than before. Mary held her hand and whispered softly. She didn't want Lily to wake up frightened and alone. She told her daughter stories about the river, about how they used to collect stones and pretend they were treasures. She reminded her of their little garden, where flowers would bloom in spring, bright and full of life. Mary wanted to keep her daughter's heart surrounded by soft and beautiful thoughts, even in sleep. The fire in the small fireplace burned low, filling the room with a warm orange glow. The shadows danced gently on the walls, but Mary didn't feel alone anymore. Even though Luke was far away, his kindness had left a quiet strength in the room. She checked the cloth on Lily's forehead again, replaced it with a fresh, cool one, and whispered, "Hold on, sweetheart. Help is coming." Outside, the world was silent except for the gentle sighing of the wind. Far down the road, Luke reached the wooden bridge that crossed the creek. He slowed the horse to a gentle trot, listening to the water flowing softly beneath the bridge. The sound reminded him of simpler days when the world felt quiet and calm, but tonight it wasn't calmness he sought, it was time. He had to reach the town before the night grew too deep. He crossed the bridge and urged his horse forward again. The lights of the small town ahead came into view, faint but shining like little stars on the ground. A feeling of relief touched him, but he didn't let it slow him down. He needed to find the doctor. When he finally entered the town, most of the shops were already closed. The windows were dark and the streets were empty. A few lanterns burned on the sides of the road, their lights soft and golden. He knew exactly where to go. The town's doctor lived near the center, in a simple house with a sign that read Dr. Weston. Luke guided the horse to a stop in front of the gate. He jumped down quickly, his boots touching the ground softly. The house was quiet, but a single lamp still glowed inside. He knocked on the door firmly but respectfully. After a moment, the door opened and a middle-aged man in a long night coat appeared. His hair was a little gray, and his face carried the calm of someone who had seen many long nights. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Luke with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "Luke?" the doctor said softly. "It's late. What brings you here?" "Doc," Luke began, slightly out of breath, "there's a little girl. She's sick. Fever's bad. Her mama's all alone. She lives near the creek. We need your help." Dr. Weston didn't hesitate. He was a man who had dedicated his life to helping people, and he knew when time mattered. "Give me a moment," he said, stepping back into the house. Luke waited outside, breathing deeply, looking up at the quiet night sky. A few minutes later, the doctor returned with a small leather bag in his hand, the one he always carried when someone was in need. He put on his coat and nodded. "Let's go," he said. Luke helped him onto the horse, and together they rode off into the night. The journey back felt longer, not because of the distance, but because of the weight in their hearts. Luke guided the horse carefully, making sure they moved fast but steady. The doctor held his bag tightly, ready for whatever awaited him at the little cabin. Meanwhile, Mary sat beside Lily, her eyes fixed on the small window. Every sound outside made her heart jump with hope. She whispered quiet prayers to the stars, asking them to light Luke's way back to her. She didn't know how long it had been, but it felt like forever. Her daughter moved slightly, letting out a soft sound, and Mary immediately leaned closer. "I'm here, sweetheart," she whispered gently, smoothing the hair from Lily's forehead. "You're not alone. Mama's right here." She could hear the wind outside and the soft creak of the wooden walls. Every tick of time made her chest tighten. But she didn't let fear break her. She couldn't. Not for Lily. Then, just as the night seemed to stretch endlessly, Mary heard it. Faint at first, but clear, the sound of hooves approaching fast. Her heart leaped. She rushed to the door and opened it. The cold wind brushed her face, and in the distance she saw two figures on horseback. Luke was back. The horse slowed as it approached the cabin. Luke jumped down first and then helped Dr. Weston down. Mary's eyes filled with tears the moment she saw the doctor's bag. She covered her mouth with her hand, whispering a quiet "thank God" under her breath. "Ma'am," Luke said softly, "we've got help." Mary didn't have words. She just nodded, her eyes shining with a mix of exhaustion, fear, and hope. The doctor gave her a kind smile and stepped inside. He washed his hands at the small water basin, then walked quietly to the little bed where Lily lay. The firelight flickered across the room as the doctor knelt beside the child. He gently placed his hand on Lily's forehead and listened to her breathing. His face grew serious but not hopeless. He opened his bag and took out a few small bottles, clean cloth, and other tools. Mary stood close, wringing her hands nervously, but Luke placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "He knows what he's doing," Luke whispered. The doctor worked with quiet care, giving the little girl what she needed and explaining each step softly so Mary would not be afraid. "She's strong," the doctor said after a while, "and she has a good chance. We just need to keep her cool, let her rest, and give her time." Tears of relief filled Mary's eyes as she nodded. Luke felt the tension in the room ease just a little. The long night wasn't over, but hope had walked through the door. The doctor stayed by Lily's bedside, gently tending to her. Mary sat on one side, holding her daughter's hand, and Luke sat near the fire, watching quietly. The sound of the horse outside faded into the calm night, replaced by the soft crackle of the fire. The world outside was wide and cold, but inside that small cabin something warm had grown. Trust, kindness, and a shared hope. 3 people from different paths now sat together, united by the care for one small, precious life. Luke looked at the child, then at Mary, and then at the fire. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but in that moment he knew this. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in loud voices or big actions. It's found in quiet courage, in people showing up when someone cries out for help. And on that long night, that quiet courage filled the little cabin by the creek. The night slowly stretched on, and the wind outside grew softer, brushing gently against the wooden cabin walls. Inside, the fire burned with a warm glow, filling the room with light that danced quietly on the floor and walls. The shadow swayed as if listening to the soft breathing of the people inside. Mary sat beside Lily's bed, her hands holding her little girl's fingers gently. She could feel the small warmth of her child's skin, but it still carried the heat of the fever. Her heart beat fast as if counting each of Lily's breaths. She watched her daughter's chest rise and fall, hoping for a sign that things were getting better. Dr. Weston sat on the other side of the bed, his face calm and focused. His hands moved with care as he checked Lily's pulse and her forehead again. He listened to her breathing and felt the slight tremble in her body. Then he reached for his bag and pulled out a small bottle of medicine. He mixed it with warm water and held it carefully. "She needs to drink this slowly," the doctor said in a gentle voice. "It will help bring the fever down. It will give her little body some rest." Mary nodded quickly as if holding on to every word. Her hands trembled a little as she helped the doctor lift Lily's head. The child's eyes were still closed, but she moved weakly, responding to the soft touch of her mother's hands. Mary whispered, "Sweetheart, Mama's here. You're safe." The doctor guided the spoon carefully to Lily's lips. A few drops of the warm liquid touched her mouth, and slowly she swallowed. Mary felt a small wave of hope rise in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. Luke sat quietly near the fire. His hat rested on the table beside him, and his hands were clasped loosely in front of him. He had been in many places, seen many faces, but this small cabin felt different. He wasn't just passing through. He was part of something real. The air was filled with quiet worry, soft prayers, and gentle strength. He glanced at Mary. Even though her face was tired, there was something strong in the way she held herself, like a tree that bends in the wind but never breaks. He respected that kind of strength deeply. The doctor finished giving Lily the medicine and placed the cup aside. Then he looked at Mary and spoke softly. "This is an important time. Her body is fighting the fever. It may take some hours, but I believe she's strong. We just need to stay close, keep her cool, and let the medicine work." Mary nodded again, swallowing hard. Her heart was full of fear, but also full of hope. She touched Lily's cheek gently, as if her touch alone could keep her safe. The doctor added more cool cloth to Lily's forehead and changed the one on her neck. Mary followed his every move with her eyes, learning so she could continue it through the night. Luke stood and walked over to the small water bucket to fill it with fresh water. He brought it to the bedside without a word, but the quiet way he moved said more than any words could. "Thank you," Mary whispered softly to him. Luke gave a small nod. "You don't need to thank me, ma'am," he said gently. "We're all here for her now." The hours moved slowly, each minute feeling longer than the one before. The sound of the fire crackling was the only thing that broke the silence, along with the soft breaths from Lily. Outside, the night animals whispered in the darkness, the call of an owl, the rustle of leaves, the quiet song of the wind. Mary never let go of her daughter's hand. She talked to her in a soft, steady voice. "Do you remember the yellow flowers near the river, Lily? The ones you like to pick and put in your hair? When you're better, we'll go there again. We'll pick the brightest ones." Her words were like a lullaby. Even if Lily couldn't hear her fully, Mary believed her daughter could feel her love. Luke watched the scene quietly. He wasn't used to moments like these, soft and still, where everything that mattered was in one small room. He had spent so much of his life on the move, never staying in one place long enough to feel part of something. But tonight he felt it, the quiet weight of love and hope. The doctor leaned back slightly in his chair but kept his eyes on the little girl. He had seen many nights like this, some full of sorrow and some full of light. He had learned that hope was a quiet but powerful thing. Hours passed. The clock on the wall ticked softly, marking the passing time. Slowly, something began to change. Lily's breathing became a little more even. The deep flush on her cheeks began to fade little by little. The fever, though still there, felt lighter. Mary noticed it first. She pressed her hand gently against Lily's forehead, then turned to the doctor with wide eyes. She's cooler," Mary whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of surprise and hope. Dr. Weston touched Lily's forehead and nodded slowly, a small smile growing on his tired face. "Yes," he said gently, "her fever's starting to come down. That's a good sign." Mary felt a warm rush of relief spread through her chest. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of hope, the kind that made her heart feel lighter. She covered her mouth with her hand and whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Luke felt something lift inside him too. He let out a slow breath, one he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The room, which had felt heavy with worry before, now felt softer, filled with a quiet warmth. Lily stirred slightly on the bed. Her small fingers moved in Mary's hand and a soft sound escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered like butterfly wings, and for the first time that night, her eyes opened a little. They were tired, but they were there and alive and warm. "Sweetheart," Mary whispered, her heart almost bursting. She leaned close, brushing her daughter's hair gently. "Mama's here. You're okay. You're going to be okay." Lily blinked slowly, her lips moving softly. "Mama," she whispered weakly. That single word filled the room with more power than any long speech could have. It was a sound full of love, full of life. Mary gently kissed her daughter's forehead, holding back her tears so her daughter would only see her smile. The doctor gave a small nod of approval. "She's through the worst of it," he said softly. "She still needs rest, but she's a strong little girl." Mary held Lily's hand against her chest as if she never wanted to let it go. Luke looked at them and felt a quiet warmth settle deep in his chest. He wasn't family, but in that moment he felt connected to something bigger than himself. The doctor stood slowly and stretched his back. "I'll stay here tonight to keep an eye on her," he said gently. "But I believe she's going to be all right." Mary's voice shook as she said, "Thank you, doctor." "Thank you so much." He gave her a kind smile. "You're a strong mother," he said. "And she's a brave girl. She has your strength." Luke walked outside for a moment to check on the horse. The cool air met his face, but it felt softer now. The stars still shone brightly, but they didn't feel so far away anymore. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the fresh night air, and then returned inside. Mary was still beside Lily, humming softly, and the doctor was writing something down on a small piece of paper, instructions for the next few days. Luke sat back by the fire, watching quietly. He wasn't used to staying in one place this long, but leaving didn't even cross his mind. As the night moved toward dawn, a soft light began to touch the sky outside. The dark slowly faded and pale blue colors spread like a promise. The birds began to sing their morning songs. The world felt new again. Inside, Lily was sleeping peacefully now, her small face calm and her breathing steady. The fever had loosened its hold and her body finally found rest. Mary rested her head on the edge of the bed, her hand still holding Lily's. She didn't sleep, but for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The doctor leaned back in his chair and sighed softly. He had seen so many long nights like this, but they never lost their meaning. Luke stared at the small family, feeling a quiet pride in being part of their story. The world outside had kept turning while they sat in this little room, fighting with nothing but hope, love, and kindness. And that was enough. Sometimes the biggest changes happen not with loud moments, but in soft, quiet nights when strangers come together to hold on to hope. Morning light slowly touched the land like a gentle hand waking the world from a long night. The soft golden sun rose behind the hills, spreading a warm glow over the small cabin by the creek. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. Birds sang their early songs and the wind moved through the trees like a quiet whisper. Inside the little cabin, the fire in the hearth had burned low, leaving behind a soft red glow. The night's fear and worry had slowly melted away with the darkness. Lily was still sleeping peacefully on her small bed, wrapped in a clean blanket. Her tiny chest rose and fell in an even, calm rhythm. Her face was no longer hot with fever, and the deep flush had faded away. Her breathing was soft, almost like the sound of a gentle breeze. Mary sat beside the bed, her hand still holding Lily's. Her head rested against the edge of the mattress, her eyes heavy with sleeplessness. But even in her tiredness, there was peace on her face, a kind of peace she hadn't felt in a very long time. The night had been long and filled with fear, but morning had brought a gift she had prayed for, her daughter's safety. Dr. Weston sat quietly in a wooden chair near the wall. His eyes were closed, but he wasn't fully asleep. He was resting, listening to the sounds of the morning as they slowly wrapped around the cabin. He had stayed awake most of the night to make sure Lily's fever didn't return. But seeing her peaceful face now was all the reward he needed. Luke was the first to step outside when the light touched the window. He opened the door slowly and breathed in the fresh air. The sky was painted in soft orange and blue, and the world smelled new. He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the cool morning breeze on his skin. After a long night of silence, the sounds of birds and the rustling of leaves felt like music. He walked over to his horse, which was still tied near the fence. The horse lifted its head and snorted softly as Luke approached, as if saying good morning in its own quiet way. Luke gently patted the horse's neck and whispered, "You did good last night, girl. Real good." The animal seemed to understand. For a moment, Luke just stood there, looking out at the horizon. He wasn't a man who often felt deeply attached to places. He had spent most of his life moving from town to town, never staying too long. But something about this night felt different. Something about that little cabin, that brave woman and her child had left a mark on him. Back inside, Mary slowly opened her eyes. She lifted her head and looked down at Lily. The girl was still resting, but her cheeks had regained a soft, healthy color. Her little lips were slightly curved, as if she were dreaming a sweet dream. Mary gently brushed her daughter's hair back and whispered, "Thank you, God. Thank you for listening." She turned and saw the doctor still sitting quietly. She lowered her voice and said softly, "Dr. Weston, thank you. I don't have words big enough for what you've done for us." The doctor opened his eyes slowly and gave her a warm, tired smile. "No thanks needed," he said gently. "She's a strong little girl. She fought hard and you never left her side. That kind of love makes a difference." Tears filled Mary's eyes again, but this time they weren't from fear. They were from relief and gratitude. She wiped them away with the corner of her shawl. I thought I was going to lose her," she whispered. "You didn't," the doctor said softly. "Because you believed. Because you fought for her." At that moment, the door opened slowly and Luke stepped inside. The warm morning light followed him, filling the room with a soft glow. Mary turned to look at him and their eyes met. She saw the same quiet strength in him that she had seen the night before, but now it carried something else too. Gentleness. "She's resting," Luke said in a soft voice. "The morning's here." Mary nodded and gave him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. If you hadn't stopped to help me, I don't know what would have happened." Luke shook his head gently. "I just did what anyone should have done," he replied. "You're the one who walked all the way into town. You're the one who didn't give up." But Mary shook her head. "No," she said quietly, her eyes shining with emotion. "You didn't have to help. But you did. And because of that, my little girl is still here." Luke lowered his eyes for a moment. He wasn't used to being thanked like that. In his life on the road, most people barely remembered his face after he left. But here, this moment felt different. It felt like he mattered. Dr. Weston stood up slowly, stretching his back. "She should keep resting," he said. "I'll come back tomorrow to check on her, but I believe she's going to recover well." Mary's hands tightened around his gently. "You've given me back my world," she whispered. The doctor smiled kindly. "You gave yourself that. I only helped a little." He packed his bag and prepared to leave, but before he stepped out the door, he placed a hand on Mary's shoulder. "You're a good mother," he said softly. "Don't ever doubt that." Mary's heart swelled with quiet pride. She watched as the doctor left, his figure slowly disappearing down the path, the morning light wrapping around him like a golden ribbon. The cabin was quiet again, except for the gentle breathing of Lily and the soft sound of the wind outside. Luke remained standing near the door, not sure if he should stay or go. He had always been good at leaving. It was something that came naturally to him. But now his feet didn't want to move. Mary noticed the hesitation in his eyes. "You don't have to stay," she said gently, "but you're welcome to if you want." Luke looked at the little girl, then back at Mary. He wasn't a man of many words, but his silence was full of meaning. "I'll stay for a little while," he said finally. Mary gave a soft smile. "I'd like that." The hours passed quietly. Lily woke up slowly, blinking her sleepy eyes. When she saw her mother, a small smile spread across her lips. "Mama," she whispered, her voice still weak but full of life. Mary leaned close and kissed her forehead. "My sweet Lily," she whispered. "You're okay now. Everything's going to be okay." Luke stood a little away, watching the scene quietly. He saw the way Mary held her daughter, the way Lily's small hand reached up to touch her mother's cheek. It was a moment so pure and full of love that Luke felt something inside him shift. "Who's that?" Lily asked softly, pointing at Luke with her tiny finger. Mary turned to look at him and then back at her daughter. That's Luke, she said gently. He's the cowboy who helped Mama bring the doctor to you. Lily's eyes widened a little.
He helped me?
Luke smiled slightly and nodded. I just gave your mama a ride, little one. She's the real hero. Lily's small smile grew brighter. Thank you, Mr. Luke, she whispered. Luke tipped his hat slightly, his eyes soft. You're welcome, sweetheart. The sound of her tiny voice filled the room with something beautiful. It was hope made real. Mary fixed Lily's pillow, helped her sit up a little, and gave her a small cup of water. Lily drank slowly, her eyes blinking at the sunlight that now filled the cabin. Everything looked brighter. The wooden walls, the table, the little vase with a single flower in it. Even the silence felt warm. Outside, the creek sparkled in the morning light, and the birds flew freely across the sky. It was a simple morning, but to Mary it felt like a miracle. Luke helped fetch some water from the creek and added more wood to the fire. Mary made a small pot of tea and a little soup for Lily. The house that had felt so heavy with worry the night before now felt alive and light again. As the day passed, Lily grew stronger bit by bit. She even laughed softly when Luke told her about the stars he saw on his ride last night. She listened with big, curious eyes, imagining the bright sky above. Mary watched them with quiet gratitude. She knew she would never forget this night, or this man who came when she had no one else to turn to. When the sun began to set again, turning the sky pink and gold, Luke stood by the door, his hat in his hands. I should be heading out soon, he said softly. Mary stood too, walking closer. She didn't want to hold him back, but she also didn't want to let his kindness fade like a passing cloud. You'll always be welcome here, she said gently. You've given me more than I can ever repay. Luke looked at her, then at Lily. The little girl smiled at him with a warmth that reached deeper than words. For the first time in a long time, Luke felt a pull in his heart, a quiet reminder that some places are worth remembering. He placed his hat back on his head and gave a small nod. You don't owe me anything, he said. You just take care of that little girl. Mary's eyes softened. I will, she whispered. Luke walked out into the evening, the soft wind wrapping around him. The sky above him was wide, the world open once again. But this time, as he rode away, he didn't feel like just another traveler. He carried with him a story of a mother's love, a little girl's courage, and a night when hope had been stronger than fear. Back in the cabin, Mary held Lily close as they watched the sun disappear behind the hills. Life would never be easy, but they had something stronger now. Faith, love, and a memory that would stay in their hearts forever.